What's up, everybody? Nick here from P2W Fantasy, reporting from the office on my lunch break here. So, figured it'd be a good time to hop on a live stream pod just because it gets kind of difficult during the week at times, just with the different things popping up. But yeah, here to talk to you guys about topic I thought about: cut ties or keep these guys. So, with this topic today, we're looking at players that are rostered in 50% of leagues. Just looked at ESPN, so 50% or more of leagues, and some struggling players. And what do we do with these guys? So I actually I'm whipping it out right now, threw a poll on Twitter with all of these that we're going to talk about today. Some of them are pretty obvious what you'll do with these guys eventually. Some of them I thought were pretty interesting to think about. Got a decent amount of votes too on all of the different scenarios here. So to kick us off here, first guy to talk about, again, these guys are rostered in 50% or more of ESPN leagues, and they are struggling this year. First guy on the list here is Nick with the sleeves. Not used to this. I know I got the proper work outfit on right now. I'm a whole different person. Leave work and then I just whip out the tattoos and everything. No, but first guy here on the list, Jarvis Landry, Cleveland Browns. So I surveyed Twitter on this one, and the consensus was 65% of people said to keep Jarvis Landry, and then 35% said to cut. So just some facts here on Landry. Wide receiver 45 on the year, averaging 9.7 points. He's had 5 weeks under that average, though. So he's been under 9.7 points in 5 weeks. Again, we're just looking at ESPN, PPR, scoring. He did have some weeks where he had 11.1, 15.28, 12.8, 10.96. So he had some decent weeks, but nothing that really stands out as a must plug in and play. We saw targets that have been 11 and 9, but then we saw a range of targets to be somewhere between 3 through 5. So definitely some ups and downs here. Him averaging 9.7 as the wide receiver 1 on this team is not super appealing. But at the same time, him being rostered in 82% of leagues, I don't think he's a guy you can drop right now, but I wouldn't be comfortable playing him right now. There's no signs. Baker's not playing well. He's not getting consistent targets. He's not scoring well. I'd be having a difficult time flexing Jarvis Landry as of right now. So I think with him, you don't drop him. You don't cut him. He's rostered in way too many leagues. But I do think that if you still have your trade deadlines open, he might be that extra push in a trade. I'm holding on to to Landry just for the reason we haven't seen what he can do without Odell in good weather. That's true, could be up in the air, but I mean, you're not going to cut him, obviously. But I think if you do want to upgrade in a position, he might be a decent guy to throw in a package deal. Could just be me, but with that average of 9.7 points, I don't see tons of room for optimism with him moving forward. Michael Gallup's the next guy on the list here. Obviously, the Cowboys have gone through so many different loops this season with losing Dak and then having Andy Dalton step up, and then he's out because of a concussion and COVID as well. Michael Gallup, the survey consensus here was 75% of people said cut, and then 25% of people said keep him. He's rostered in close to 50% of leagues right now. Averaging 9.1. He's had 6 weeks where he didn't even hit 9 points, though. So that's pretty concerning right there. He did have 25.8 week 3 against Seattle. Again, it's Seattle, so they do give up a lot of points to wide receivers and quarterbacks. 11.3 and 13.1 on some other weeks. His targets over the last 3 weeks have been 2, 12, and 7. So ranging from 2 to 12, kind of up in the air in terms of that. But yeah, very much of a fluctuation there. Probably not a guy you can cut either, just because they have 3 solid guys there. And if one of them was to get banged up, the other guys that are still healthy get a good bump. But I do think, again, that Michael Gallup is a guy that you're trying to make a deal, and he could easily be a guy that you just add to that deal to get the player you want. So let's say you're trying to make a big trade for a top wide receiver. So you're offering a good running back, and you'll say, hey, I'll add Michael Gallup as well. Or I'm trying to get whatever player X, and you're throwing out a decent player, and you say, hey, I'll give you Michael Gallup as well. So I wouldn't just cut him. I think if your trade deadlines are still open, it'd be a guy that you can look to add in a deal. But that's the case there. So another guy struggling right now that I wrote on this list, and I did survey him too, is Melvin Gordon. So Melvin Gordon's the running back 26 right now, but the average points per game is 12.1, so not that good. That's more of a flex play in comparison to some of these other running backs that are scoring maybe somewhere in the 14, 15 range. The consensus for the votes on Twitter for Melvin Gordon had 49 votes. 59% of people said to keep him, 41% said to cut. So with a running back like him, again, if you want to trade him, that might be one thing. But Melvin Gordon, the last 3 games, 10.7, 3.1, and 4.6. He did have weeks where he had 15-ish and 16-ish points. He's looking more like a low-end flex, though, in comparison to an RB target. So not tons of room for optimism. You would hope that the volume's there, but they had 47 passing attempts the last week. So another guy that might be someone you look to add to a trade. So it looks like the common thing here, but you can't cut Melvin Gordon just because he's a starting running back. He's going to see some volume. But with the average of points and his actual production as of late, the trend's not looking too good for him. Next guy on this list, Jonathan Taylor. RB 19 on the year, but as of late, not looking too pretty for him, averaging 11.9 points for the year. The last 3 games, 5.1, 9.4, and 5.7. So his last couple of games have been pretty much a nightmare for you, especially with these other guys like Hines had a great last game. Wilkins sneaks in these touches. So seeing the trend of Taylor right now is not good. Surveying Twitter, there was 61 votes. 79% of people said to keep him, though, which 100% you should do. I think you just hold him and you probably bench him until you see a good week. The Packers defense is not good against the rush. They're playing them. So if you want to take a chance on him having an upswing in production, you might look to plug him in this week, maybe to a flex position versus your running back position. But otherwise, you can't drop him. And I don't think you're going to get a good enough trade to sell him. So I think the season's long, obviously. It's week 10, so you might have lost some optimism for Taylor, but he's a guy you're probably just stashing for now and you're not getting rid of. We'll skip ahead here. Next guy on the list, Marquise Brown. What do you do with Marquise Brown? So Twitter says to cut him. 53% of the votes, 51 votes, said to cut Marquise Brown. 47 said keep. So Marquise Brown is rostered in 80.3% of leagues right now. I'd say to try to get a deal for him, but no one wants to trade for him. All right. I have not seen anybody in any of the leagues I'm in. I'm in 8 leagues, and nobody thinks of him too highly right now. The average of 9.7 points is not good. It's not good for a wide receiver, especially for a guy that was supposed to be the wide receiver 1 on his team. So you look at most teams and their wide receiver 1 might be a flex. You look at a guy like Crowder on the Jets. The Jets are so bad, but when Crowder was hot, he was hot, and he was targeted a lot. Marquise Brown, out of 9 games, 6 of them, he's had under 10 points. So that's pretty sketchy right there to be willing to plug him in. I know last year we saw some big plays out of him, big downfield throws from Lamar. We're not seeing it this year. The targets have fluctuated a bit. Typically around 6. 6 seems to be the most common number for Marquise Brown here. We saw 10 in a week, but we've also saw 2 in a week. So the 15.1, 12.6, 9.8 are the highs for him. So he's not scoring like 30 or anything like that ever. Looks like the ceiling this season has been just under 20. So the ceiling's pretty low for Marquise Brown as of 10 weeks of football. It's getting close to the time you cut ties with him. Cutting ties with him might just mean throwing him on your bench, and just hoping that there's some sort of swing in production from him to Lamar, that connection there. But it's not looking good right now. Lamar Jackson's not really helping any of his skill players be successful. So I think Marquise Brown is a guy you're benching until further notice, until you see, hey, he's getting 7, 8, 9 targets and he's being productive with them on the field and scoring. Next one here is Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary's been frustrating for fantasy managers. RB 34 on the year so far. Twitter said 72% said to cut him. 28% said to keep him. So that was pretty interesting to see that many amount of people said to cut Devin Singletary. He's rostered in 78.4% of leagues. So he's heavily rostered, but his production's bad. Averaging 9 points, 8 games under 11 points. So he's rarely getting above that 11-point threshold. We saw in weeks 3 and 4, 16.1, 18.7. Those were good. But keep in mind, in those 2 weeks, Zach Moss wasn't there. So Devin Singletary doesn't score. I think he's got 1 touchdown on the year in comparison to Zach Moss has 3 or 4, I think, maybe 4 or 5, something in that range, but it's a lot more than Devin Singletary has. So if he's not averaging enough points to be relevant, Zach Moss is taking away a lot of touches and potentially looking like the more efficient back. Devin Singletary is a guy you're not playing. Unless you're in a big pinch for a bye or an injury, you're not playing Devin Singletary from here on out. So you're cutting ties in the sense that you're benching him because he shouldn't be on waivers, but it's just not giving you the production you need for a running back that you probably drafted to be somewhere between 15 and 25 for that range. Next on the list, AJ Green. AJ Green, out of 46 votes, 91% said to cut him. Wide receiver 76 on the year. He's still rostered in 65% of leagues. His average points is 7 right now. Week 10, he had 0. In week 5, he had 0. So he completely burned guys that gave him any trust in those weeks. He's had 6 weeks under 9 points. This is a guy that should be on waivers because there's no reason to waste your roster spot. You're not going to play him. You're not going to flex him. He's not getting the target share that can give you some sort of optimism moving forward. I just think AJ Green, his days are over in terms of fantasy. Next guy struggling here with production, LeVeon Bell. So LeVeon Bell surveyed to show that 67% of people said to cut him out of 46 votes. So only 33% of people said to keep him. He's rostered in 74.6% of leagues, which is a high number. The average points scored, though, is 5.3. He did miss 3 weeks, but he's RB 78 overall. The last 3 games for Lev Bell here has been 3.9, 6.8, and 1.3. So he's not scoring over 7 points at all. The touches across the last 3 weeks have been 6, 9, and 5. So he's not touching the ball 10 times, not even close to it on 2 of these weeks. So looking forward, I wouldn't say to cut Lev Bell because he'd be a nice handcuff for CEH. If, knock on wood, CEH gets banged up, then you got a good handcuff on one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the league. So he's a guy you can keep stashed away in your bench, but you're not playing him anytime soon moving forward, especially with that average of 5.3 points and the limited touches. He's not giving you much. So I agree with Twitter on cutting ties, but in the sense of cutting them to your bench. Another interesting guy is Jared Goff. So Jared Goff's just over 50%. He's 54.2%. Twitter said to keep him. 55% of people said to keep him. 44% of people said to cut ties with Jared Goff. He's a QB 18 on the year. He's coming off a bad week against Seattle. So typically Seattle gives up the most points or a ton of points to quarterbacks on a weekly basis. It's almost like a must start for a quarterback if they're playing Seattle. He only had 10.48 though this past week versus them. He's had 3 games of 20 plus, but that's it on the season, and he's averaging 16.7. So he's not been good fantasy wise. Being a top 18 guy instead of a top 10 or 12 guy is not what I thought Jared Goff was going to be. The only thing looking forward here is that his fantasy playoff schedule looks pretty good. So if you are going to be a team that's in the fantasy playoffs, we're talking mostly about redraft here. He plays 14 through 16, New England, the Jets, and Seattle again. So those are 3 games where Jared Goff should have a good game. He should have had a good one last week, and he did not. But I do trust that with the weapons of Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, and Josh Reynolds is playing very well. Jared Goff should be good in those weeks of fantasy playoffs. So if you're in a pinch for the quarterback position, I think that's a very good streamer, especially in those weeks where you're looking to win. You're looking to be cliche and play to win. All right, next guy on the list here, Mike Gesicki. What do we do with Mike Gesicki? I thought he was going to be very, very good this season. He showed flashes last season. He was very productive with fits, but he's a tight end 17 on the year right now. Looking at the Twitter poll, Mike Gesicki, 52% of people said to keep and 48% said to cut. So almost 50-50 right there. He's averaging 8.1 points per week. He's had 0, 1.8, 7.2, and 6 points on his last 4. So the last 4 games, if you started him in your tight end position, he hasn't been good for you. He did have 27 points week 2 versus Buffalo, in which he saw 11 targets. So 2 touchdowns on the year is now what we expected out of Mike Gesicki. I think we need to see an increase in his target share with Tua. I think last game he might have had 5 targets, but wasn't super productive with them. Didn't get a ton of yards. So with Mike Gesicki, with the tight end position being a nightmare at times, I think you just hold on to him and you stash him. But hopefully you have somebody else to play and plug in. I think there is an upside potential there for him to score and for Tua to have to throw the ball, but it's not been something we've seen as of the last 4 games for him. Next guy, Cam Newton, QB 19 on the year, averaging 18.7 points. He did have 24.56 week 9 versus the Jets, so keep that in mind. It was versus the Jets. 34.58 versus Seattle, so keep in mind it was Seattle. He has 3 passing touchdowns on the year and 9 rushing touchdowns. So the rushing touchdowns have saved his fantasy production to a degree. 3 passing touchdowns is pretty comical, though, for a starting quarterback who's played in almost every single game. Houston, Arizona, the Chargers, the Rams, Miami, Buffalo. So he has some games coming up that you might have some room and some ideas to play him and plug him in. But I think versus Houston this week might be a decent streaming game for Cam. But otherwise, him being QB 19 on the year, if you're in a 1 quarterback league, 10, 12 team, you probably shouldn't plug him in on a weekly basis. If he's QB 19, it wouldn't make sense if there's 12 guys in your league and you're playing the QB 19. So I know the rushing upside's there. I know the touchdowns could be there in general, but unless it's a good stream, I'm benching Cam most of these weeks coming up. I think Houston this week is probably the best on his schedule for the next 5 games. Otherwise, he's going to my bench if I'm even keeping him. I personally wouldn't keep him, but some would. Do I trust Tua or Winston this week? So let's pull up 2. I know Jameis Winston's playing the Falcons, which is a good matchup there. Falcons typically give up a lot to the quarterback position and the wide receiver position. Tua this week, let's see what that looks like. Versus Denver, and Denver is typically a pretty good defense, but I don't think as of late they've been as scary as they once were. I think Tua is safer and Winston's the more upside. So I think the ceiling is higher for Winston if he is able to sling the ball like he used to, especially against this Falcons defense. But Tua, I think, is a safer, more competent, more efficient quarterback. So it kind of depends on what your team needs this week. If you're in a tough matchup where you might be chasing some points, maybe you look for some upside in Winston. If maybe you're supposed to be projected to win, you're looking for the more safe route. I think Tua is the safer route. So it just depends on what you're looking for this week. Do you want a higher ceiling with more of a risk, or do you want a lower ceiling with maybe a lower floor in Tua? So that's a good question. All right. Next guy on the list, Jared Cook. Jared Cook, tight end 19 on the year. Weeks 5 through 8, he's had 13.2 points, a bye, 12.2, and then 16.1. He's had 3 weeks as well, though, under 5 points. He had 0 last week. So I thought at some point Adam Troutman, the rookie, might have been stepping up to take away some of that target share against Cook, but he's very touchdown dependent. So if you're looking for a guy that can score and can get you that 6 points or whatever your league scoring is, Jared Cook might be the guy for you. But otherwise, the volume is not really there. And I think the fact that Drew Brees is gone, I would not be comfortable starting Jared Cook. I don't know what Winston and him are going to look like together. I think Winston's going to be more of a downfield, sling the ball as much as possible sort of guy if they let him. But Jared Cook without Drew Brees after coming off that 0-point week, I'm benching him for a while and hoping that I have a guy that has more target volume on an offense. Next guy here, Dallas Goedert, another tight end here. Surveying Twitter here, 72% of people said to keep him, 28% said to cut Dallas Goedert. 24.1 week 1, which looked very good like last year. He was a top 10 guy last year. Outside of that, though, he missed weeks 4 through 7. The last 2 games, 2.5 and 7.3. He had 6 targets last game, though, so that shows potential for some better production. So I think Goddard's a guy that we saw be very productive in the previous season. This is a team that needs more outlets to throw to. Wentz has been struggling. So, with him having these 2 bad weeks, maybe it was due to him still recovering from missing a lot of time. Maybe it's because it went struggling. But even with Ertz coming back, I wouldn't fade Dallas Goedert just because we've seen him be so productive before. It's not a new quarterback. It's not a new coach. It's the same sort of situation. So if he's healthy and they have this core, I think he finds a lot of space on the field. So for a guy that saw 6 targets last week, we just talked about Jared Cook, who barely sees targets. I think I'd be more optimistic about moving with Dallas Goedert forward here. Next guy on the list here is Leonard Fournette, RB38 on the year. He did miss at least a week, I think. Surveying Twitter, it looks like 59% of people said to cut him, or no, to keep him, and 41 said to cut him. So 59 said keep, 41 said cut. So kind of close there with the voting. Looks like 51 votes in general. Last 3 weeks, 10.1, 10.1, and then 5, averaging 9.5 points on the year. We did see what we thought he'd be like in week 2, 27.6 points. Week 7, 15.7 points. Looks like Rojo's the lead back again, though. I don't know if this swing is up and down or what the case is, but in games they have to throw the ball, I think he can have some good PPR value. So I wouldn't cut him. You're not cutting Leonard Fournette. If you want to bench him on certain weeks, it might be dependent on the matchup, might be dependent on who has the hot hand in the system. If they're running the ball out, I think it's Rojo. Never was a Rojo fan, still really not a Rojo fan, but he's playing well. So I have to give him the credit there. But when you're looking for a running back in a PPR format that's going to catch the ball, it's going to be Leonard Fournette. So I'm not cutting Leonard Fournette, but it's going to be hard to play him on weeks where they might just be able to run the ball and not have to dump off passes to him. It'll be interesting to see with the schedule coming up how they use him. Will he be as utilized as he was this past game or 2 games ago? But we saw Rojo make a mistake and get almost benched for a game. So I think you just got to play it by ear and play it by who has the hot hand and what the game situations are going to be like for running backs like that. Last one on the list. So I have a handful of tight ends. I think it's just due to the tight end position being such a fluctuation this year. But Jonnu Smith's a tight end 4, but he's played pretty bad in terms of fantasy as the last couple games. Surveyed Twitter. Almost everybody said to keep him. 53 votes, 89% said to keep him. The concerning part has been the last couple of weeks. Not really seeing tons of volume. He's had weeks where he scored 2.3, 1.9, 4.9, 11.2, 9.9. Can't talk, 9.5. So weeks 8 and 9, he saw 2 targets each. And then he had 6 versus Indy last game. So the targets are up and down. I know Corey Davis is more important on this offense now. The week said Jonnu Smith wasn't really used. Corey Davis was heavily used. Tight end position, like I said before, is very hard to be comfortable with unless you have Darren Waller or Travis Kelce right now. George Kittle out. Nobody else outside of maybe TJ Hawkinson's been pretty good. I think he's been solid in terms of fantasy on a weekly basis, but everybody else been very up and down. So seeing the targets go up and down for Jonnu Smith, I don't think you cut ties with him, obviously. I think he's a guy that we saw some huge weeks from. He's tight end 4 for a reason. So even if he's had these bad weeks, he's had some huge weeks as well. So the ceiling's pretty high. So Jonnu Smith's a guy you're just going to have to keep rolling with and hope the volume's there. All right. So went through a handful of players there. Cut ties or keep these guys. I think the consensus for the most part is there's very few guys you can just cut. But if your trade deadline is still up, you might be able to cushion your deals with these guys. But any questions from anybody? Give like 10, 15 seconds here before I cut out. All right. Well, if you tuned in, thank you for watching.